incredibly awesome music to bring you some incredibly awesome political talk on Damn Radio.
Hello, good evening, welcome. I am Samuel Trapp. This is International Flavor you are listening to here live, coming to you live from the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio. Should you feel the urge, you can call in this evening, 573-746-8020. I do have a decent amount of topics to go through tonight. Some that are just a recap, going back and looking at a few things that I'm going to get into. I got interested in just a couple of days ago and by the way, I apologize for not being available last night. I was really not feeling well, and I've got something going around. I'm not sure I'm positively out of it yet, but I don't like getting sick, and so I just refuse to accept. I don't have time for it. It's there's exciting news that you keep seeing. I've seen it in many places online, and all the TVs are up, and keep seeing these things about Nancy Pelosi saying she's going to retire. Oh my God. I thought she'd stick around till she died in there, and that's what they do these days. They just stick around until they pass away. I don't mean to laugh about that. It's atrocious what happens there. But at any rate, I got interested in discussing, thinking about and going. I want to go back and revisit U.S. Agency for International Development, because I got curious. You don't hear much about it anymore, and there are still NGOs everywhere, and I wondered how they were being funded now, if it's just something that the State Department is taking over, or if there's other funding that's going to come straight through the legislative branch that'll fund them directly. So I want to get into that a little bit tonight and see what is what if it comes out that way. I have a number of stories. One of the big ones that I have been following, and this wouldn't surprise me. The Russians have been talking about this for a long time. And this, it's conspiracy theory, kinda, but it would not surprise me a drop with the people that are in charge of the planet today. And so the story, and it came out today, it's really not very long at all. So I want to share it with you, and I've been trying to find other sources for it to see where we can find, but let's get to the topic and tell you what it is. It's the West is planning, according to Russia's foreign intelligence services, the West is planning a major sabotage at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and says that NATO members are pushing Kyiv to cause an accident at the facility and blame it on Russia. This is what they are saying. And so, and that wouldn't surprise me, is of course you want to blame it on Russia. And so the West is urging Kyiv to commit a major act of sabotage at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that would lead to casualties among Ukrainian and EU citizens, according to Russia's SVR, Foreign Intelligence Service. And they said one of the proposals allegedly put forward by Kyiv's foreign backers as the most effective would be to commit a major act of sabotage that will result in significant civilian casualties. So the West is said to be considering orchestrating the incident Zaporizhzhia is Europe's largest nuclear power plant, and they want to do something there so that it leads to a meltdown of the reactor core, at least one. And I believe there are 6 of them there. So the Russian intelligence states that British NGO, here we are with NGOs again, Chatham House, has already calculated the consequences of such an accident, and they have determined that the residents of Kiev-controlled territories and the EU countries near the Ukrainian western borders would be directly in the area of the largest radioactive dispersion. And the British think tank, Chatham House, has noted that the most challenging, and this is their quote, according to the Russians, the most challenging aspect of implementing such a plot is determining how to blame Russia, how to attribute responsibility for the catastrophe to Russia. So Chatham House is allegedly already preparing arguments for these developments in advance, so to make sure that the Western public unequivocally takes Kiev's side in determining who is responsible for the incident. It noted that the plan is set to be similar to the tragedy of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17, which was shot down over eastern Ukraine in 2014, which killed 298 people on board. The incident occurred as Kiev's troops were attempting to retake the republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, who said they were independent. Ukraine and its backers blamed the incident on Russia, and with no proof, of course. Russia has said that the plane was brought down by a missile only used by Kiev. And here's the quote. The collective West is once again ready to deceive and even to kill Ukrainians and citizens of Western countries in order to attribute the crimes of the Kiev regime to Russia and to justify Russophobic policy and efforts to incite the war, said the SVR. Crazy sauce, isn't it? There's been a lot of news about Zelensky giving awards to more Nazi symbol wearers. That this is all over the news, and it's but you won't see it over here. But there's plenty of video of it, and I don't know. By the way, on November 6, 1943, Soviet troops expelled, so this is in 1943, Soviet troops expelled the Nazis from Kiev. And the Russians celebrated that anniversary today. And so there's a small article about that as well. So Russia has commemorated the 82nd anniversary of the Red Army's liberation of Kiev from the Nazis, marking a key victory in the Battle of the Dnieper and one of the most symbolically significant moments of World War II. The operation to retake the capital of the Ukrainian Republic began on November 1, 1943, with Soviet troops from the 1st Ukrainian Front under General Nikolai Vatutin launching coordinated attacks from the north and the south of the city. After heavy fighting in a surprise maneuver, the Nazi forces retreated westward. On November 6, Soviet troops entered the city, ending 778 days of the German occupation of Kiev. Although September 6 was once a national day of remembrance in Soviet and post-Soviet Ukraine, the commemoration has now been removed from the official calendar. In 2023, Ukrainian authorities dismantled the monument that was built honoring General Vatutin. And attempts to cast a heroic past of a nation into oblivion are doomed to fail. There is no doubt that the day is approaching when this once prosperous land will be liberated from the rule of Nazi placeholders who are continuing to pillage it in their selfish interests, said Russian Foreign Ministry spokesman Maria Zakharova on Thursday. The German occupation of Kiev, which began in September 1941, left deep scars on the city and its people. Of the 400,000 civilians who remained in the city under Nazi control, fewer than half survived. Around 100,000 were deported to concentration camps or forced labor. Tens of thousands died from starvation, cold, or execution. One of the most notorious atrocities was the Baba Yar massacre, in which over 30,000 Jews were killed in just 2 days in Kiev. By 1943, the total number of victims exceeded 120,000. As Soviet troops approached, the retreating German forces employed a scorched earth policy, demolishing critical infrastructure and cultural landmarks, including the Dormition Cathedral, the Kiev Pechersk Lavra Monastery, the Kiev Conservatory, and parts of the city's historic Khreshchatyk Street. Commenting on the anniversary, the head of the Russian Znania Society, Maxim Drevel, said that today's Ukraine is occupied not by troops, but by a harmful and destructive ideology. Back then, fascists burned down cities. Now they are burning history, culture, and tradition. In 2015, Kiev adopted a package of decommunization laws which banned Soviet symbols and elevated the so-called fighters for Ukraine's independence, some of whom collaborated with Nazi Germany and took part in mass killings of civilians, to the status of national hero, like Stepan Bandera. And there are others, and I wanted to share with you the what Zelensky did. Where is that? Where is that story? I had it pulled up, and now I can't find the doggone thing. And it is a good story. Well, it's a terrible story, but it shows quite a bit of symbols that Zelensky was honoring on their uniforms and whatnot, and straight up Nazi symbols on the wall behind him. It's crazy. There was another. Viktor Orban is coming to the United States, and he's coming to meet Trump. And it says that these conservative allies and friends are repairing Biden-era damage between the two. And this is actually one of the stories that got me reminded to go after and look at all the NGOs that are still out there and see how they're getting funded these days. But let's share a little bit about what is going on with Hungarian Prime Minister Orban here. Let's see here. Viktor Orban intends to open a new phase of relations with the U.S. Now, remember, this is where they were supposed to have, Hungary is a place where they were supposed to have a summit, another one, between Putin and Trump. Maybe with Orban coming over here, that idea will be, I don't know what, will be reborn. You know, we never know what'll happen over there. But he's coming over this week. The Hungarian leader, a close conservative political ally of Trump, noted on X on Thursday that new opportunities have emerged following years of tension under Biden's administration. And what he wrote was, And he's at PM_Viktor Orban is how you follow him on X. And his quote was, since President @real Donald Trump's re-election, new opportunities have emerged in Hungarian-American relations. The first 10 months of this year marked the initial phase, during which we repaired the damage Hungary and Hungarian-American relations suffered under the Biden administration. Isn't that crazy? The politically motivated sanctions have disappeared. American funding for NGOs attacking Hungary has ended, and we can once again travel to the United States without a visa. With this, the first phase has come to an end. Today, we are traveling to Washington to open a new chapter in Hungarian-American relations with President Trump. Our goal is to establish a strategic partnership that includes energy cooperation, investment, defense collaboration, and discussions on the post-war landscape following the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We're working on an agreement based on mutual benefit, one that serves the interests of every Hungarian citizen. I think that was, a good statement there. USAID was accused, way back when, of funding anti-Orban groups. In March, Hungary's Sovereignty Protection Office accused foreign donors of channeling nearly $70 million to organizations that tried to undermine the Orban government. The report identified the U.S. Democratic Party and its allies among business elites as one of the main contributors. How about that? Working alongside EU leadership and major Western foundations, including the Open Society Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the German Marshall Fund. Curious. Between 2022 and 24, U.S. Agency for International Development transferred over $10 million to Hungarian activist groups. The Trump administration has since moved to dismantle USAID, claiming it wasted taxpayer funds on ideologically driven projects that did not serve the U.S. Biden-era pressure. Relations between Budapest and Washington deteriorated sharply under the Biden administration. They accused Orban of undermining democracy and failing to downgrade his ties with Moscow. In 2024, U.S. Ambassador David Pressman labeled Orban a temporary leader who could not simply wait out American pressure, since he warned Washington was not sitting idle. The U.S. imposed visa restrictions on Hungarian passport holders in 2021, citing security concerns, measures that Trump lifted in September. Orban has consistently criticized Western military aid to Ukraine, argues that conflict causes economic damage to the European Union. He said the Biden administration was part of a pro-war international interest group pushing for hostilities. The Hungarian leader expressed strong support for the old Trumpster and his mediation efforts, including a summit between Trump and Putin in Budapest that was proposed last month. Although both sides agree in principle, the meeting was postponed after disagreements emerged over the agenda. So sanctions, exemptions, and energy security. Let's talk a little bit about that. Following the delay of the summit, the Trump administration imposed new sanctions on Russian oil companies. Hungary, which depends on Russian crude for its refineries, is seeking exemptions. Expect that to be talked about when they come over. Budapest has condemned Kiev's attacks on the Druzhba pipeline, which allows Russian oil to flow to Hungary and has accused Brussels of ignoring its own legitimate energy concerns for the sake of pro-Kiev policies. Ukraine justifies its sabotage attempt, claiming that no nation should buy Russian products anyway, and blasting Hungary's opposition to its bids to join EU and NATO, because Orban says, he will not agree to that at all on behalf of them. If you remember way back when the Ukrainian attacks on the Russian Druzhba pipeline, Kiev struck it, hitting supplies of oil to Hungary and Slovakia 3 times in August. And Trump said at the time that he was very angry about it, and he didn't like Kiev attacking those pipelines that disadvantaged what Budapest was trying to do. There was another story similar on this topic that said, where did that one go? Yep, here it is. This one came out just today. And I think it's important to note because this story, Kiev is trying to conscript ethnic Hungarians. So, Kiev's controversial conscription crews, these mobilization guys, are attempting to enlist a group of ethnic Hungarian students in Ukraine's western Transcarpathia region, said Hungary's Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó. Ukrainian draft officers deceived 4 students at the Transcarpathian Hungarian University in the town of Beregovo, where a significant ethnic Hungarian minority is based, and they showed up at a local recruitment center. Then they were forcefully held at the facility and they tried to pressure them to join the military. Szijjártó said in a Facebook post that the students were eventually released, and the Hungarian foreign minister has been in constant contact with the Transcarpathian Hungarian Cultural Association that represents an estimated 100 to 150,000 ethnic Hungarians in the region and the administration of the university. The Ukrainian legislation is clear. These students are exempt from conscription, he said. The fact that the 4 men avoided illegal mobilization is good news, but at the same time, these type of activities stress the importance of peace between Russia and Ukraine. The sooner there is peace, the sooner this conscription will stop. The Regional Territorial Center of Recruitment and Social Support issued a statement on Thursday saying the claims of students being detained were untrue and manipulative, is what they say. The men had been summoned to confirm their personal data, but it turned out that 3 of them had not undergone the obligatory medical examination. The Hungarians left the recruitment center as soon as the checkups were complete, is what they say. So, who knows? There are 2 sides, well, sometimes multiple million sides to every story that we wish to go through. Let's see. Remember me last night telling you about those horrible videos of the Ukrainians blowing up their own citizens, trying to get to the Russian side of the front line. They were trying to get over there, and they blew them up right in the road. Well, there's a large opinion piece that I encourage you to read. You might go and check out Ukraine slaughters civilians again and then blames Russia for it. And it's written by a Canadian journalist named Ava Bartlett. And so if you look her up, she has done military-style coverage in conflict zones in the Middle East, in Syria, and Palestine, and then in Kiev, well, in Ukraine also. And basically, I'll give a quick summary. The shocking video published on Russian media and Telegram showed the last moments of two civilians before they were killed by Ukrainian drones in Kupiansk, east of the city of Kharkov. The drone observed the first man carrying a white flag, universal sign for surrender. I watched it. These are terrible. Or, in the case of civilians, that they pose no threat before flying right at him, blowing him apart, and injuring the dog walking beside him, who died as well. The second civilian, upon reaching the body of the first, crossed himself and walked on. He was praying on his knees, crossing himself repeatedly as a drone hovered, observing him, and then went on to strike him, blowing him apart as well. Ukrainian media, not for the first time, blamed Russian drone operators. Yet, as Russian war correspondent Alexander Semenyov pointed out, the men were walking east on a road in territory controlled by the Russian army. There are no targets for our drones on our rear roads, and there cannot be, he wrote, predicting Ukraine propagandists would blame Russia for this crime as well. In fact, a week prior, war correspondent Evgeny Podubny posted a video showing how a Russian drone operator elsewhere in Kupiansk went out of his way to avoid scaring civilians. The operator was searching for a military target, but the first to cross its path were two teenagers on a scooter. In a second, the drone stops moving to avoid frightening the young men. After waiting for the scooter to leave, the operator steered the drone in the opposite direction. In the same post, he noted a video was posted on social media by one of the teens who filmed the drone and said, "Thank you for a second life." And the article goes on for, quite a few examples, talks about other examples of the same thing. It's really horrible what is going on over there. The neo-Nazi problem, that opinion was another that you should read. That one's written by a political analyst called Nadezhda Romanenko. And the videos are ridiculous in there. And there's plenty of them with Zelensky over there presenting to swastika wearing and SS symbol wearing groups. And it's... I may share it with you further on down the line here, but I wanted to cover a story that I want, that wanted to get to something a little bit further afield and talk about the Chinese currency, because remember, I am of the belief and opinion that the de-dollarization is coming anyway. That is what I believe. I believe de-dollarization is on its way, and I believe it's how do you put it? It's a foregone conclusion. The rest of the world is doing it. And there was a recent story. This one came out. What was the date on this story? Darn it. It doesn't have... It was in the last week. And it's basically Kenya's conversion. Kenya now is converting Chinese debt to its currency, which is the renminbi. And it's economic... it's not saying they have strained U.S. ties, but get this. Last month, Kenya's Treasury Secretary announced that the country converted 3 major Chinese loans from U.S. dollars into their own currency. So the original dollar loans were worth about $5 billion when agreed with China, their Exim Bank, in 2014 and 15. The funds were used to pay Chinese contractors for construction of Kenya's standard gauge railway connecting Mombasa with Nairobi. Now remember, I talk about these sorts of infrastructure projects that China is making deals on all over the planet, and I've done quite a bit of talking about them. So these funds where these loans started in 2014 and 15. While this is the first time that China has agreed to a currency conversion with an African country, Ethiopia's move to initiate talks with Beijing on converting part of its own debt suggests that others will soon follow. The loan conversion will be seen as both a sign of a Kenyan pivot towards China and as a milestone for Chinese efforts to internationalize its own currency. But this move comes as J.D. Vance reportedly plans to visit Kenya in late November. He'll be the first U.S. vice president to do so since 2010, and it could be seen as exacerbating already strained U.S.-Kenya relationships. But such narratives are too quick to attach a wider geopolitical attention to Kenya's economic program. Kenyan President Ruto is pursuing interlinked goals of economic stability and political survival ahead of his own election in 2027. So when Kenya is hit by a wider withdrawal of U.S. initiatives in Africa, the closer Kenya-China relations are primarily a reflection of Kenya's government economic goals rather than a rejection of the dollar. I'm not sure that I agree with that, because it still is a continual path down the road of I don't want to call it de-dollarization, but of using your own currency, and that's a big deal. So the conversion of the outstanding loan principal is $3.5 billion. It's above all, it's a move to reduce the pressure of Kenya's debt burden, which has doubled as a share of GDP in the last 10 years. So China is by far Kenya's largest creditor, and but this commercial borrowing and loans account for a high overall share of Kenyan debt. But Chinese railway loans have proven, that they're that they help build this infrastructure, but the interest rates have gone up. So two of the loans were set at 3 and 3.6% above the U.S. market rate. So, and the 5-year grace periods expired in 19 and 20. So total interest cost was around 4%. So the conversion into renminbi shifts them into China's lower interest rates of 3%. So China is encouraging these people to refinance their debt. This is all pressure on the dollar too, and China is, I don't want to call it predatory, but they're doing some very interesting things to make sure that this happens. Kenya's fiscal challenges, which led to the government attempts to impose higher taxes under, guess what, International Monetary Fund conditions that were put into place, were a catalyst for a major youth-led protest in 2024. And President Ruto's government is aware of similar triggers and has scrambled to reduce liquidity pressure, which lessens the urgency to agree to new IMF programs. Excuse me. Savings on interest costs with China are just one element of Kenya's strategy to manage its own debt, which draws upon diverse international partnerships. Equally critical have been two 1.5 billion euro bond issuances this year and a UAE-backed commercial loan as well. So they have those, and I wanted to dig further into some of those financial issues. And so I got a couple of topics that I wanted to get to, and I'm not sure how long they will take to get through them, but I have a decent amount of content on these. And I wanted to start with, I think I'm going to start on USAID, because I went back and did a segment, little bit of research, trying to find out what's going on in the legislative branch, trying to fund these NGOs and things that used to be funded by U.S. Agency for International Development, including Rubio stating that a lot of these sorts of things have been taken over and transferred to the State Department, because I think this is important stuff. And I want to see it go away. But being a doubting Samuel, I believe that a lot of this is just going to be still funded either directly by Congress, all these NGOs, or on the sly still through the State Department budgets, and which seems to be the case. So I've got a little bit to go through for you here. So let's start with the world's reaction to Washington pulling the plug on USAID after the old Trumpster took office in January. And on January 20, the White House froze most foreign aid for a 90-day review. And within weeks, the administration began ripping out, all kinds of funding and plumbing, terminated the vast majority of USAID programs, and shifted the other parts under the state. By March, the number that everyone quoted was pretty much the same. 83% of U.S. Agency for International Development's programs were gone. That's that's a pretty good amputation of U.S. development capacity within a number of weeks. Independent trackers started laying out timelines. European analysts noted a gap that nobody could fill on such short notice. Even federal judges were trying to get the administration to zero out appropriated funds, but the machine wasn't just turned off, it was dismantled and wheeled out of the building. I mean, it's gone, is what everybody says. But the rest of the world reacted, well, in various ways, but mostly no applause. I was applauding it, I got to tell you. But around the world, there was alarm, resignation, and a good amount of people saying, we told you so, that, you can't trust the U.S., basically. Well, yeah, but it's a freaking NGOs. Who in the world said that they should be funded by the government outside of anything having to do? I still appreciate the argument and how all this nonsense went down for so many years. So European foreign policy people, they were pretty brutal, about it. The U.S. is abandoning a key tool of influence, and there's crises that are stacking up. The European Council on Foreign Relations said that retrenchment is going to boomerang as humanitarian shocks and political instability land on Europe's doorstep. Yeah, but why should the U.S. fund all that? That's what I want to know. European parliaments and think tanks, was said that by mid-March, they said 83% of USAID programs were shut, and a $60 billion gap was out there. One they admit the EU couldn't pay, because it had its own budget problems. Translation, Washington created a vacuum and Europe can't fill it overnight. Well, I don't understand why we should pay for all this crap anyway. Editorials and briefings across the world said it was strategic. The Guardian called out the geopolitical cost. Of course, they say they're losing ground to competitors. Who? They also published reporting from West Africa that complicates the saintly image of big box aid. That Europeans aren't romantic about development, but they sure like what it buys in their own influence, right? And they see the U.S. dumping a tool it spent decades refining, but it's not refining. It's a bunch of criminals, that pay themselves these inflated salaries. They take college kids and instantly give them $200,000 to $300,000 a year for crap jobs. All you got to do is go over and be a social media influencer in Ukraine, and they pay you butt tons of money. It's nonsense. So Africa says, the African press, for them, it's, anger. They balance basically. I'm over here yawning. I'm really sorry. Two basic truths. One, the cuts definitely hurt. And two, over-reliance on U.S. pipelines was always a risk. The Daily Maverick did modeling and warned the math was ugly. Millions shoved toward extreme poverty as the program money evaporated. Now, I disagree with that. Millions of people shoved toward extreme poverty. They weren't saving the poverty. It'd be different if there were something being done, but it's just handout money and a tenth of what it ought to be because the cost of these NGOs was all extremely top-heavy and all these people that pocketed all kinds of money. And then they would, all of the funding thing that Rubio would talk about or anybody would talk about, Doge would talk about when they were starting these issues. And, I'm frankly glad it happened. 3 years from now, it'll be back. They're trying to do it even now. So, but it's I don't know. The East African clocked the politics, taking all assistance on day one, jolted governments and NGOs that run on predictable cash flow. Yeah, free money, basically. A columnist called for, getting rid of donor dependence and building domestic revenue, but they said that's a long way away. So right now, they say Africa still needs free money. I don't agree with that. Reuters string of dispatches from Haiti to southern Africa says that clinics are shutting down on Fridays, malnutrition screenings are suspended, and HIV and TB lines aren't always, getting covered because the funding is walking away. UNICEF warned of a 20% budget drop by 2026, with U.S. cuts as a central driver. But why in the world are we paying for all this? Why? I don't understand that. The World Health Organization flagged TB response in high-burden countries where USAID had paid over a quarter of the costs historically. For that, yeah, but it costs 3 times that to pay all the salaries of the idiots that are doing it. So how about let's talk about some faith-based and humanitarian people, that I wanted to find out about that. They're basically saying people are going to die because of policy changes. Caritas Internationalis, which is the Vatican's global charity network, said catastrophic, reckless, and warned that abrupt shutdowns would kill people. Amnesty International called the cuts chaotic, and they documented studies where life-saving services were frozen midstream. But again, nobody ever says why the U.S. has to be the one to fund this. UNICEF said fewer vaccines, fewer kids in school, less protection from trafficking and recruitment. You don't have to agree with that, but when the biggest donor jolts the system, they say that the people on the margins, that are in these extreme scenarios, that they pay the most and they pay first. I disagree. I think the people that are the top heavy ones pay first, and they, but they've got so much money it doesn't freaking matter. Most time they just move on to the next freebie job where you don't have to do anything. High paid do-gooder, right? What kind of job is that? Seriously. How hard can it be to distribute free money and keep a hell of a lot of it for yourself, right? Anyway, I'm probably bitching that I shouldn't be bitching about because it's probably not all that terrible, but I'm telling you, there are many of these programs were just crap, and we all know that. Let's see. Development watchers, people who actually read spreadsheets, said that this wasn't about, tweaking priorities. The Kaiser Family Foundation compiled the freeze, the cancellation, the relocation to being under state, and the knife fights, in court over rescission. Analysts at the Center for Global Development have country and sector level estimates based on leaked termination list And the conclusion was pretty consistent for these guys. It's a cliff, not a slope. I mean, they're just cutting it. And frankly, if you're going to get rid of it anyway, probably, just like in Seinfeld, when Seinfeld and George were talking about getting rid of a girlfriend, it's like a Band-Aid, rip it off. Yep, rip it off. Be done with it. So let's talk about U.S. courts and Congress, right? The subplot. So while the executive branch, unilaterally cut off millions, courts tried, and still are, to challenge the idea that the president can cancel congressionally appropriated funds by running out the clock with rescission. Reuters coverage said judges tapped on the brakes, but the relief was partial, and they didn't force the administration to restart canceled contracts. Congress is split. Some try to keep discrete lines alive, global health here, refugee fund there, but the administrative machinery that runs those lines, the NGOs parts anyway, had already been gutted. So, hopefully this will stick, and I'm wondering, because I want to see, my main theory was that the a-holes in the legislative branch are just going to refund it directly instead of doing, they'll refund these NGOs with government money and do the exact same thing they were doing before with zero oversight, just like it was before, with no controls of any kind, just hand money to, whatever senator's nephew is running whatever global recipient of free money at a huge salary, and then passing on a tiny portion to people that are in need and are supposed to be the ones getting the bulk of the money. Doesn't appear that way. Let's talk about the China and Russia angle, what they have said. So Beijing says that the shutdown, in this getting rid of the NGOs and stuff, is proof that the U.S. only funds these things when it's convenient. They said that the U.S. closure show that America is turning inward. Well, maybe that's partial. And they called it a win-win. Whether you buy that or not, it's cheap for them to say, and it's expensive to counter it once you, shut off your own NGO funding. So Chinese commentators didn't need to, they note that less U.S. money in global media and civil society means fewer critical stories about China in Western outlets. So it's a self-inflicted information deficit. So, it's for the U.S. Says the U.S. is all about, telling these whatever lies they wish to tell all over the planet, and a lot of it has to do with these extremely left-wing things that none of us support anyway. Well, let's see, but it's definitely uncomfortable for the aid lobby these days, and that makes me happy. Some African reporting and commentary argue that big NGOs grabbed most of the money, drove up local salaries, and then when the grants were over, it wasn't that big of a It wasn't as big as it could have been because the money wasn't getting there anyway. All of these people were having these huge salaries because they were NGO guys. The Guardian described these West African voices as stop-start aid packages and broken promises. Yeah, the U.S. exit was a strategic goal, and yes, the old models were paternalistic, and both are true together, is what the Guardian said. And so, everybody, you can understand both points of view. You can understand that, okay, maybe there's some people that you would prefer to help aren't getting help, but I look at it as more of a point of view. Well, the system itself was so cocked up. Why in the world would you want to continue to fund it the way that it has been being funded? So I don't know. Where are we? The WHO warned that TB programs will slip quickly without USAID's 1/4 share of donor funding. And the Washington Post said the acts coming over the U.S. pledge threatened childhood immunization pipelines that, according to them, saved tens of millions of lives, right? So we're just supposed to pay for this forever because tens of millions of lives are out there. We're supposed to do this, right? What about the rest of the world? You know, where does the rest of the money come from? Why is our percentage so high? That's what I want to know. UNICEF said budget shrinkage and program triage coming in 2025 and 26, but I want to know where it's coming from. You know, where that, and I haven't seen it. I wanted to have a look at, if you want the policy, all I wanted to do is do it legally. One theme in foreign coverage everywhere that American audiences sometimes miss is process does matter because it signals reliability. When U.S. courts say the White House can't time out Congress's purse power, editors and other capitals similarly say, well, yeah, they don't. It's not because they love the process, because they just want something more predictable. What about us wanting something more predictable? What about us wanting to know why we have no programs that take care of our own people, but all the money all over the world is supposed to come from us to take care of everyone else? What do we do for our own here? Not enough, you know. Anyway, businesses, NGOs, and ministries, they budget on multi-year cycles. So they're trying to regroup and use European, Chinese, Gulf state financing and things like that. But these aren't as, for my view, these are not as easy. So every time I go through and I read all these stories about where the money is gone and what it's happening, it's always an expectation that the U.S. is supposed to. We have to be consistent. We have to consistently fund all of these programs. Why? Why do we have to consistently fund them? I tell you what, there were talks. Remember all the talks about stopping and starting and the waivers that they wanted to be granted? Field teams were told that emergency exceptions existed, but then they were not paid anyway. And Trump didn't want to pay them and get rid of it. That's refugee stories from the New York Times back in February. They froze money and then didn't give it to him. Contractor and local staff layoffs. Man, this was awesome. I thought it was great. So drivers were rehired and let go. Nurses shifted to private clinics. Project vehicles were parked. In West Africa, it was the clinic no longer running on the weekend. This is The Guardian saying, that story. Research and trials paused. New contracts, new ways to get them. Reuters says USAID would take, at least on the tuberculosis side, that it would take literally 6 to 18 months to rebuild the structure that was there because of the freebies that the U.S. was passing out. And the UN agencies are trying to figure out how to do this. UNICEF and others are cutting programming and staff. UN system is not a bottomless pit, but American money is. Whenever you read these things, it's like, geez, look what America did. And that's it. It's never anything except, gee, there was all this free money and now there isn't. That's it. And so Trump is all guilty. I like that it was taken out. So let's say there's a couple other things. Even the president called the impacts devastating at one point and insisted that others should pick up the tab. And I happen to agree with that thought processes. Courts blocked some of the cancellations. Secretary of State's office carved out small exceptions. There were some of these things that still continued to work, but none of the huge headlines changed. And the 83% is a very serious number that those programs were really taken apart. And I remember watching Rubio a little bit later in April, I think it was, where he was saying, well, we've brought some of the programs that we wish to keep are coming under the Department of State, and they will have some oversight. They will have some review, some direction from the government, and not just NGO people doing what they want, and jacking up salaries for people that run them. So what about the partners? Let's talk about foreign ministers and finance people. They want to watch money, people, and logistics. So here's what they're saying in Nairobi, Pretoria, Lima, Jakarta. U.S. reliability is in question, not because a single budget line moved, but because the entire delivery platform was scrapped. Well, did anybody think that the U.S. will just start all this up when the old Trumpster's gone from office? I think it'll go back to the way things were, sadly. I really do. Allegedly, Europe is attempting to replace some of the, with its own politics and fiscal rules and things like that, but they don't have the money for it. And we don't either, by the way. Who does have the money? China is starting to fill some of the gaps, and they are advertising their own development models. The PRC state media is already rolling out a number of these sorts of programs to fill it in and do a lot more on the, especially in the global South. So I don't know. It's, I say aid isn't charity. It's supposed to be an instrument for change. So, don't act surprised when when a country takes it away, if they can't afford it. Well, if the instrument of change should be in the United States first, don't you think? I sure do. If it's our money. Why are we funding weirdo programs in, I don't know, Zimbabwe? And I made that up. I don't know of any in specific. But Rubio had lists and lists of them that he was reading. Because remember, he had that one. It's one of my favorites to watch of him when he was interviewed on Capitol Hill. And one of the senators go, I wish I could withdraw my vote for voting for you. And he said, well, I brought the numbers. He goes, tell me what potential good we got out of funding I don't know, kindergarten drag shows or whatever, and I don't remember the exact ones, kindergarten drag shows that took place in this country or whatever. But the old model was just rot. It was rotted. It was bloated. You'd have fly-in consultants. You'd have starting and stopping. That, they said it before we did. The inefficiency was huge. And the demolition, frankly, needed to happen. The courts didn't give these people what they wanted on this. They said that the U.S. Constitution still means something in appropriations, but it didn't put field nurses back on payroll. You know what I mean? So, what does the replacement actually look like of the 17 after the 17? Percent went back to the Secretary of State's office. So the State's Office of Foreign Assistance still does a bit of some of the things that were removed. Public diplomacy, media crowds, you can still push for more money, but as the development trades have said in plain English, that is certainly not a one-for-one swap of USAID's project design, which had contracting, field presence, all these other things. You can outsource some pieces, but you can't outsource the institutional money or relationships. That is what the foreign commentariat keeps circling back to. So even if they could open these pipelines, I suppose you could call them, later, the people this was a hand grenade thrown into the entire system. Frankly, I loved it. And so what is the next, that foreign capitals are gaming on? They're saying that TB and immunization is recovering, but it'll take longer to get there through WHO and UNICEF. And they've already adjusted their expectations downward because the U.S. isn't just funding it all. USAID's media lines, that's what I wanted to get rid of. Those are gone. So the National Endowment for Democracy, though, is funded straight through Congress now again. But smaller, they are a little bit smaller. So fewer propaganda outlets on the U.S. side, and people are taking some notice on that. European Council on Foreign Relations are saying that the EU should step up amid foreign aid cuts from the Trump administration. So, I don't know. In one of the stranger turns, the president called the downstream effects devastating, like I told you before, even while they were still looking to do deeper cuts. And, they want to get rid of them. So, I mean, there's plenty to see in that, but it looks like it's been pretty damn complete. And I like it that it is staying that way. And I wanted to talk about that, but I also wanted to dig in a little bit, if I could, because I started with that Kenya story about swapping the Chinese debt into its own currency, which is actually not quite de-dollarization, but it will have an impact. And the fact that a couple other countries are doing the same thing. So who's likely the next ones? I did a little bit of research on that. And what did Kenya actually do? They converted the big standard gauge railway loans from U.S. dollars to their own currency. And that helped them lower the interest costs of their own loan. And the annual savings was about $215 million, right? Business Daily Africa ran the math and said that this is economically good for them. This is why they are doing it. And you're going to run into more and more of this because interest rates in China are far lower than they are here. Why this makes sense and they're saying that Nairobi is going to have this issue because federal-driven U.S. dollar rates are killing budgets, right? China has to trade rate cuts, so they give a rate cut to switch to the local currency. So that is, it's a hell of a plan, and it means, well, remember, we're still in negotiation with China. Things aren't all that wonderful. Oh, by the way, did you see the Jai Shankar video where he came out and he said, and he did it again? And I love listening to that guy. You should go out and look at it on YouTube and see. I'll see if I can find it and play it for you on Sunday night. Maybe I'll do a bit more of a deep dive into that because he was talking about. Even after all of the attacks on India by President Trump over the last several weeks, that India isn't the largest purchaser of Russian oil and gas. Oil is China. Gas is still Europe. that buys oil from and that's not India, and so they're the ones taking all this attention, and it was a pretty good. It was only a 5-minute speech by him, but it was a pretty powerful one, and once again he did pretty well. Anyway, let's get back to the debt switch and what's happening with these debts, because remember, a lot of debt. Why are people getting debt? Not from the International Monetary Fund, not from the World Bank, and they're getting them direct from China's Belts and Roads initiatives, or through other funding, direct funding of projects, straight up by the various banks in China. Well, they're doing it because China doesn't demand that they, back gays or whatever, that you have to accept these other conditions in order for the IMF to fund you or to recommend funding. So China doesn't do that. And so now they have a lot of debt out there that they own from other countries, and they're encouraging them, just like they did in Kenya, they're encouraging them to swap and switch to their national currencies, but trading in their own national currencies, which is becoming easier and easier as they go. And if it's saving, like it did in Kenya, 215 million a year, hell, why wouldn't you do it? Instead you're going to stay in the dollar. What's Trump going to do about that one? The dollar is this will cause it to take a bit of a hit, over time. So let's see. And the Fed rates, the US dollar rates are still hurting. And Kenya and China linked imports are now going to be paid in RMB. And that's according to a lot of think tanks, including one of them, that Chatham House, too. So the RMB markets are getting thinner for, less costly for African countries. And no matter how you slice it, their funding is still less costly than the U.S. dollar alternatives through IMF and World Bank. So if a government's hard currency are mostly U.S. dollars and euros, switching debt into Chinese money doesn't eliminate all currency risk, but it certainly lessens it. So who else is moving towards these? Let's get a bit of a list here, okay? Because we want to know if it's de-dollarization or if it's just smart finance. It appears to me to be the smart financing. If it's going to save you $213 million a year, of course you're going to do it, if all things else being equal, right? So let's look at Ethiopia. Informal talks with Beijing to convert parts of its own $5.38 billion China debt. They're in that conversation right now. And if they do swap that, it's going to save them probably double what it's what it's saving currently in Kenya. So Ethiopia, definitely. Indonesia is planning to debut offshore bonds with China and talking with China about refinancing all its own high-speed rail debt. That's Bloomberg is reporting that. Bloomberg's the one who reported the Ethiopian talks with China to convert dollar loans to yuan. And the same thing, this is in mid-October, the same thing, Indonesia plans to debut yuan bonds. Same thing. Egypt, memorandum of understanding already exists to expand local currency settlements and explore Chinese cooperation. Chinese Development Bank is what that is. A pipeline step for liquidity in North Africa. That's Egypt. Egypt's doing it too. And so China keeps widening these lines and clearinghouses and publicity pushes all across all kinds of borders. And that one was brought to you by Reuters. That was it was initially in April, but it was updated in late August, that story. So again, the question I wanted to know is this real de-dollarization or smart refinancing? Or is it refinancing that just results in de-dollarization, but it's the same effect no matter how you slice it anyway, right? Let's go through the payments. The RMB still sits around about all global payments, and they are going up. They're at 3%. Reserve share is still 2% of disclosed global financial reserves, and that's according to the IMF and the Fed. So the dollar is still the big dog. That's not anything that people don't. But for a handful of debt-stressed countries with major China exposure, swapping to the yuan can produce real cash flow relief, which is why Kenya did it, and Ethiopia and Egypt and Indonesia are probably going that way too. So, I find it very interesting that this is what they are doing. And I forgot. I found one more little comment that because I wondered if there were still any. Man, I can't believe I forgot this point. It's at the bottom of my BRICS because I'm such a BRICS connoisseur and have a look at it. I wanted to know if U.S. funds were still NGOs or think tanks or whatever funded by the U.S., that there are still NGOs that counter BRICS, that are attacking BRICS. And that answer turned out to be yes. National Endowment for Democracy and several others still get grants to attack BRICS countries and the BRICS discussions. So they're not as large as they used to be. They're down post USAID for International Development, but they're not gone. So there's still plenty of anti-BRICS info being pushed out these days. But USAID, Agency for International Development, is hopefully not coming back anytime soon. So there you have it. Let's see. There were a couple of other good stories I wanted to get to on these opinion pieces especially. There's quite a bit of discussion about New York going on around the world. People are talking about this. I'm sure people, if they've paid any attention to anything at all, Trump saying that people are going to be fleeing the communism in New York City, right? And it's a very interesting story that came out this evening by a guy named Graham Hertze, as I think how you say it. He's an Australian journalist and a media lawyer. So this week, this guy is young, this Zoran Mamdani, and I knew nothing about him until they were all talking about it on Election Day. So Mamdani's victory was nothing to write home about. His main opponents were the aging and tarnished former Democratic governor Andrew Cuomo, who has been plagued by sexual harassment claims for years, and the uninspiring Republican Curtis Sliwa. In an election characterized by record voter turnout, over 2 million New Yorkers voted. Mamdani won with 51% of the vote. Cuomo received 42%, and Sliwa got 7%. What makes the victory significant is that he is self-styled as a democratic socialist, and he was elected mayor without being endorsed by the Democratic Party leadership, most of whom, including Chuck Schumer, refused to endorse him at all. Mamdani is a 34-year-old Muslim of Indian heritage who was born in Uganda. His father is a prominent black studies academic, and his mother is an acclaimed filmmaker. So, Mamdani, a former celebrity rapper, social worker, and state assemblyman, ran on a left-wing populist program that focused exclusively on alleviating cost of living pressure for ordinary New Yorkers. He promised to deliver rent freezes, free public transportation, free childcare, city-owned grocery stores, and universal health care. He promised to build 200,000 affordable new houses with union labor. I wonder how he's going to pull this off. Whether he can actually implement this program is by no means clear. New York City is $5 billion in debt, and the New York state government and governor can severely limit what a New York mayor can do. But Mamdani is a strong critic of America's support for Netanyahu and Zelensky, so I'm for him for that, and has stated explicitly that he would fund his reforms by increasing taxes on New York-based corporations and the ultra-rich that control them. So the program contrasts with MAGA for sure, and which is based on magical thinking, demonizing America's supposed internal enemies, and leaving America's economic structure and widening inequalities of wealth intact. Now, I don't agree with that sentence, but it's still part of this article that I am commandeering. Mamdani maintained throughout the campaign that, unlike Trump, I can deliver for the working class. He, if his economic program was implemented, it would benefit those groups that he represents. In any rational view, cost of living pressure on ordinary Americans can only be relieved by redistributing wealth downwards from the haves to the have-nots. But some left-wing commentators have seen Mamdani's rapid political ascendancy as a transformation of the Democratic Party into a party that is, as it once was, focused on representing the traditional working class and other groups in society that have been pauperized and alienated by globalization. Interesting take. Right-wing commentators say that Mamdani's a communist, a terrorist sympathizer, an anti-Semite, and see him as a dangerous threat to America. I don't know, but this lady thinks that these views are fundamentally mistaken. He is a peculiarly New York phenomenon, and there is no possibility that his radical economic program will be adopted by the current Democratic Party leadership, despite his claim that his campaign is a referendum on where the Democratic Party goes in the future. Nor is Mamdani a serious threat to American society. In fact, his reform program is a modest one that, at present, stands little chance of attracting a majority of American voters who remain content to vote for the flailing and increasingly irrelevant Democratic Party, or alternatively, Trump re-energized populist Republican Party. New York is a Democratic city in a Democratic state. When Kennedy and Clinton launched their political careers, they ran for the Senate in New York and were elected unopposed, basically. Donald Trump and Musk implicitly acknowledged this fact when they endorsed Andrew Cuomo rather than Mamdani's Republican opponent, in a desperate attempt to prevent Mamdani from being elected. New York City has had left-wing populist mayors in the past, most notably Fiorello LaGuardia and more recently Bill de Blasio. Mamdani's a grassroots politician who stayed on message throughout his campaign, and it was based on his own personal brand of savvy and sophisticated use of social media. He focused on winning over young New Yorkers who have been left behind by globalization, together with disaffected workers, black people, and members of immigrant communities that have suffered similar fates. New York is the most expensive city in America to live in. I wonder if that's true. I always thought it was San Francisco, but maybe it is still New York. The Democratic Party leadership views Mamdani as an aberration and a threat and refused to support him. It is unsurprising that major media networks pointedly refused to endorse him. The modern-day Democratic Party, which has not represented the working class for decades, is committed to protecting the interests of global elites. Hence, its slavish adherence to their woke globalist ideologies such as catastrophic climate change, diversity privileges, and the Me Too movement and transgender rights, even though these ideologies continue to alienate an increasingly large number of ordinary American voters. Roosevelt's pragmatic New Deal reforms, which broadly favored the working class, trade unions, and minorities, have been wound back since the 70s, not only by Republicans, but just as brutally by Democratic Presidents Clinton and Obama. That is why the traditional working class, together with large segments of Black and Latino communities, have deserted the Democratic Party over the last decade and now vote for Trump. They do so not necessarily because they believe in Trump's populism, but because they refuse to vote for a party that no longer even pretends to represent them. It is true the Democratic Party has always tolerated left-wing populists, for example, William Jennings Bryan, Huey Long, George Wallace, and Bernie Sanders, but only so long as they remain local politicians and do not attempt to radically refashion the party's economic agenda. The Democratic Party can therefore live with Mamdani unless his mayoral victory sparks a wider movement to radicalize the party. If that occurs, this is the image, Mamdani will be ruthlessly cut down, as Bernie Sanders was in 2016 by Hillary Clinton and the glass ceiling and transgender rights brigades. The conservative critique of Mamdani and the well-funded smear campaign conducted against him is, of course, absurd and irrational. But McCarthyism and anti-intellectualism are now at the heart of contemporary American politics. Mamdani is neither a communist or a terrorist sympathizer, nor is he anti-Semite. In fact, many New York Jews oppose the mass killings in Gaza and enthusiastically support Mamdani. In the UK, Australia, and most Eastern European countries, Mamdani would be seen as a mainstream social democrat. But in America, an explicit social democrat economic agenda is always demonized as communism. Perceptive, where'd that go? American historians in the 50s, most notably Lewis Hartz, viewed America as being perpetually trapped in a liberal capitalist consensus in which socialism, even its moderate social democratic form, has failed to emerge as a significant political force. Unlike in the UK, Australia, and most European nations, there are powerful social democratic labor parties that have shaped politics since the earliest 20th century. The complete failure of socialism in America explains why the Democratic Party in the 70s so eagerly adopted pro-globalist ideology, like affirmative action and gay rights, and why it remains so firmly wedded to their woke globalist ideology today. Contemporary America is no longer liberal. Indeed, it has become illiberal under Trump's right-wing populist presidency, and that is unlikely to change in the foreseeable future. The power elites, a term coined by historian C. Wright Mills in the 50s, that control America can live with Trump because they know he will protect their economic interests, which he does all the time. Even those among the elites would much prefer a Democrat president for ideological reasons. They will tolerate Trump, as does the current Democratic Party leadership. The truth is that the Democratic Party, funded by large corporations and fixated on cultural wars, would rather lose elections to MAGA Republicans than permit a moderate reformist like Mamdani to radically reshape the party's economic program. How else can one explain the party's decision to run Hillary Clinton for president in 2016? Persist with the dysfunctional Biden as a presidential candidate and replace him with the inept a diversity candidate, Kamala Harris. Harris is determined to run again in 2028, and the Democratic Party might allow her to do so, ensuring yet another presidential election defeat. The Democratic Party sees Mamdani as a radical threat, but it would rather sponsor endless and pointless No Kings demonstration than adopt economic programs like Mamdani's. That is the only agenda that will allow them to begin to effectively counter Trump's right-wing populism. Mamdani's fate is likely to mirror that of other American socialists and left-wing populists. His influence will be severely curtailed by the Democratic Party leadership, and he will remain a marginalized and localized New York political figure. That is, in large part, because Mamdani's reformist economic program is still anathema to the vast majority of American voters. His agenda clearly resonates with a majority of disaffected voters in New York City, but it is electoral poison elsewhere, especially in the Midwest and the American South. Only a radical, reformed Democratic Party could alter this state of affairs, and that would be a Herculean political task that shows no sign of embracing. Mamdani's likely fate does not bode well for America's future. But in rejecting and demonizing the basic principles of social democracy, including moderate reformist economic programs, America has condemned itself to right-wing populist future that can only become progressively more unstable, illiberal, and irrationally dysfunctional. To believe that Zoran Mamdani can single-handedly reverse the current trajectory of contemporary American politics is a naive illusion. Unpalatable as it may be, it is the real meaning of his election victory this week. I liked that article, even though I don't agree with it all. But I wanted to share it with you because I thought that the New York story, I was interested because he was, where was he born again? This guy, I forget where he was born. Where'd he go? There, Uganda. That's what I thought. I wanted to say it. But he's of Indian heritage, and he's Muslim, and he's from Uganda. So, I don't know. I think I agree with the bulk of what was said in here, that he really isn't going to have all that big of an effect on national politics. That's what I think. And worrying about him probably isn't something you should waste your time on. Especially if you don't live in New York City. And trust me, New York State is going to try to curtail what he can do anyway, especially if their budget deficit is as big as they list on here. At any rate, I have covered all I plan to cover tonight. I will be back with you on Sunday evening, 9 o'clock until 10:30. And I have a research paper in the works for that I would like to share with you, that we're going to talk about. And I would be happy to discuss that with you at that time. You can listen to me Sunday through Thursday nights, 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. You can always go out to internationalflavor.com and rerun the shows at your convenience. JR does a great job of putting them all out at damradio.com/live as well. And so you have plenty of opportunities to go and listen to them. Damradio.com/schedule if you want to find out what's up on the schedule. Have a very good night.
Damn Radio. Damn.